Lola stood on the grand balcony of her husband's mansion, dressed in a flowing silk gown that caught the glow of the evening light. Her gaze drifted past the lush gardens and sparkling swimming pool, over the 10-foot-high concrete walls, to the bustling city beyond. Despite the wealth that surrounded her, an inexplicable emptiness gnawed at her heart. She sighed, remembering how she once believed marrying Chief Adielu, a powerful politician nearly 3 decades her senior, would solve her family's financial problems. It did. But at what cost? Now, her days dragged on in gilded monotony. She felt more like a trophy than a beloved wife. Tonight was no exception. Chief Adielu was away, again, on some urgent government matter. The mansion staff bustled about, meticulously arranging flowers, dusting glass tables, cooking elaborate meals no one would eat. Lola found herself on that balcony almost every evening, staring, wishing, yearning for something to stir her soul. Suddenly, a movement by the main gate caught her eye. A new face, tall, muscular, his hair cropped close. He wore a simple navy blue uniform, holding a baton at his side. The floodlight illuminated his features, strong jaw, deep-set eyes, a certain quiet dignity. She leaned forward, curiosity piqued. The man looked up momentarily, meeting her gaze. In a brief flash, she saw something unspoken in his eyes, like a storm cloud ready to burst. But just as quickly, he glanced away, resuming his silent vigil. Lola felt a strange flutter. She couldn't recall the last time she felt any sort of intrigue. But then she caught herself. He was merely a guard, newly hired. She was the wife of his boss. Still, her heart thudded uncomfortably as she recalled the intensity of his glance. Inside, Mimi, Lola's cousin who often visited, startled her with a tap on the shoulder. "You look lost, Lola. Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine," Lola managed, though her eyes drifted one last time toward the gate. "Just thinking about life." Mimi gave a suspicious, playful smirk. "Careful, cousin. Daydreaming can lead to trouble." But Lola simply smiled, a heavy sadness in her eyes, and made her way inside, wondering if her lonely nights would ever change. Cliffhanger, out of the corner of her eye, she caught the guard quietly removing his shirt in the gatehouse. She froze, holding her breath. Something in her world shifted. Early the next morning, Lola wandered outside under the pretense of picking fresh roses for the dining table. She moved slowly, eyes scanning for the new guard. Eventually, she found him by the main gate, carefully polishing the black iron bars. She approached. He stood up straight, chest broad, eyes lowered. "Good morning, Ma," he said quietly, barely meeting her gaze. "Good morning," she replied, voice soft. She noticed his name tag pinned on his shirt. Sun Canme. The name felt both foreign and beautiful on her lips. "I see you're new here." "Yes, Ma. I started last week," he answered, returning to his work, posture rigid. Lola watched him for a moment. "Thank you for keeping us safe," she said, wanting to sound genuine. But she sensed an invisible wall, as if he had locked himself in his own fortress of silence. At lunch, Lola couldn't stop thinking about how he meticulously avoided looking at her for more than a split second. Later that afternoon, she deliberately passed by the gate again. This time, she let her gold bracelet slip from her wrist. It clattered onto the pavement. Sun Canme knelt to pick it up. Their hands touched. A spark ran through Lola's body like a current. She looked up and saw surprise in his eyes, maybe even longing. But he said nothing. He simply returned the bracelet and resumed his task, face as impassive as stone. That night, Lola recounted the moment in her thoughts. She was not the type to flirt or orchestrate accidents. But for some reason, she couldn't stop herself from orchestrating every excuse to be near him. Cliffhanger, their hands had touched, just briefly, but the lingering feeling refused to fade. Something had begun, and there would be no turning back. A fierce storm rolled in unexpectedly. Rain pelted the mansion windows like marbles, turning the garden into a drenched labyrinth. Lola was on a phone call, pacing the porch, sheltered by the ornate overhang. She wore a thin blouse and loose trousers, hair pinned back. Her call ended abruptly when thunder shook the sky. She stepped into the downpour, intending to retrieve a potted plant threatened by the wind. In seconds, she was soaked to the skin. The water felt icy, stinging her arms. That was when Sun Kanmi appeared, sprinting through the sheets of rain, an umbrella in hand. Lightning illuminated his silhouette, a tall, resolute figure striding toward her like a soldier on a mission. He reached her, out of breath. "Madam, you'll catch a cold." He held the umbrella above her, his arm around her shoulder to guide her back inside. They stood huddled on the edge of the porch, hearts pounding from the storm's intensity. In the flicker of lightning, Lola realized her blouse clung to her body, revealing more than she intended. Sun Kanmi's eyes darted away, but the air crackled with tension. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging her arms for warmth. She noticed, beneath the harsh glow of the porch light, droplets of rain mingling with something on the ground. It almost looked like red water. It was just the reflection of the overhead red security bulb, but for a split second, it looked like splattered blood. The imagery jolted her. Sun Kanmi's voice broke the silence. "Please be careful, Ma. These storms can be dangerous." He paused, seemingly battling whether to say more. Finally, he stepped back into the rain, returning to his post. Lola stood there, the wind swirling around her, and an unfamiliar ache taking hold in her chest. Cliffhanger, as the thunder rumbled, she remembered the look in his eyes, terrified and passionate all at once. "Why do you always avoid looking at me?" she whispered, though he was already gone. Unable to sleep that night, Lola wandered the mansion's silent corridors. Voices echoed from the kitchen, the staff was cleaning up after dinner. She continued to the pantry in search of chamomile tea, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. She froze in the doorway. Sun Kanmi stood inside, seemingly searching for something among the shelves of dried goods. He turned at her entrance, a tiny flashlight in his hand casting shadows across his face. She mustered courage. "You're working late," she said in a hushed tone. He inclined his head. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted quietly. Something in his voice hinted at the storms inside him, far beyond the physical downpour earlier. They stood in the dim pantry, a single overhead bulb flickering. Lola felt her pulse quicken. "Sun Kanmi," she started, "why won't you look at me? Do I frighten you?" He exhaled sharply, gaze flickering to her face at last. "Because if I start looking at you," he said, voice trembling with confession, "I may not be able to stop." The words hung between them. Lola inhaled, her heart banging against her rib cage. The emptiness she had felt for years ignited into something new. He lowered his eyes, stepping aside to let her pass. She gathered her tea, hands shaking. And in that hush, they both sensed a boundary had been crossed. Cliffhanger, Lola turned off the light and left the pantry, but her mind replayed his words all night. She had never felt more alive, or more terrified. All day, Lola tried to call Chief Adielu. His phone went straight to voicemail. Evening arrived with no word. The staff tiptoed around the house, worried about the mood of their mistress. Mimi arrived for a visit, hinting that she'd heard rumors of Chief's trip. "Sis, I hate to say it, but word on the street is he's with another woman," Mimi said quietly, eyes scanning Lola's face for a reaction. Lola maintained a steely composure. She wasn't naive. She'd heard gossip for years, but to hear it confirmed again opened a familiar wound. By midnight, the staff had gone to bed. Lola, barefoot and wearing a plain nightgown, drifted out to the terrace. She couldn't bear her bedroom's emptiness. The moonlit path guided her toward the gatehouse. She hesitated, heart pounding. This was reckless. This was insane. But loneliness pushed her forward. She knocked once on the small door. Sun Kanmi answered, blinking in surprise. He wore a simple t-shirt, his muscular arms clearly defined under the dim lamp. Madam? She swallowed. Could I come in for a moment? He stepped aside without a word, pulse visibly racing. Inside, the modest guardroom was tidy, a small bed, a wooden chair, a table with a kettle. Lola stood there, feeling a surge of guilt and longing swirl together. Cliffhanger, she inhaled to steady herself. The words hung on her lips, I just need someone to talk to. But she could see the question in Sun Kanmi's eyes, would talking be enough? Sun Kanmi offered her tea. Lola cradled the steaming cup, noticing the trembling in her fingers. The guardroom was tiny, suffused with the gentle glow of a single lamp. He cleared his throat. I apologize for not having better accommodations, Ma. It's fine, she replied, forcing a small smile. She took a sip of the tea, it was earthy and calming. A heavy silence settled until she finally asked, where were you before you came here? He shifted on the wooden chair. I was away, he said cryptically. Then, exhaling, I was in prison for a while. Lola's eyebrows shot up. She hadn't expected that. For what? His jaw tensed. Wrongful accusation of theft. My family was betrayed by someone I trusted, and I paid the price. I spent 5 years inside, dreaming of a second chance. Something in her chest twisted. She knew too well what it felt like to be trapped, though her prison was lined with gold. That must have been difficult, she said softly. He nodded. It taught me many things. Who I can trust, and who I can't. This job, it's my shot at redemption. Lola reached out, placing a hand gently on his. You're not just a guard, Sun Kanmi. His eyes, dark and haunted, flickered with intensity. And you, he said in a low tone, you're not just a wife. Cliffhanger, the moment stretched. Their hands touching felt like the most natural thing in the world, yet 1,000 alarms rang in their heads. What would they do next? At 2 a.m., the mansion was silent except for the hum of the security lights. Lola remained in Sun Kanmi's guardroom, lost in conversation. They spoke of regret, of hope, of everything that had led them to this moment. The closeness felt simultaneously right and dangerous. Eventually, Lola stood, intending to leave. She turned to bid him good night, but her voice caught. Sun Kanmi stood as well, an unreadable expression on his face. She reached out to him, fingertips brushing his arm. He shuddered under her touch. In that breathless second, she leaned in, eyes half closed, heart pounding. But Sun Kanmi gently pressed his palm against her shoulder, stopping her. I can't do this, he whispered, voice tight. Hurt and disappointment bloomed on her face, but beneath it was an understanding, he was trying to protect them both. I know, she whispered, withdrawing her hand. Yet she made no move to actually leave. He dropped his hand, stepping back, gaze averted. She could see the storm raging in him, the same one raging in her. For the first time in years, she felt awake. Cliffhanger, Sun Kanmi bowed his head, torn between duty and desire. But he didn't open the door for her to leave. They both realized that ignoring this was no longer an option. Days passed in a tense stance. Chief Adil still hadn't returned, and whispers swirled about his alleged affair in Ghana. Mimi hovered, suspicious of Lola's quiet demeanor, but unable to confirm anything. Then, one fateful evening, the power went out during a raging thunderstorm. The generator failed to kick in. Shadows engulfed the mansion. Lola lit a candle and drifted through the dark halls, searching for staff to fix the backup system. She found Sun Kanmi by the main electrical panel, fiddling with wires under the glow of a small flashlight. Rain pounded on the roof as wind rattled the shutters. He stood up, frustrated. I can't fix this alone, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Their eyes locked, illuminated by tiny flickers of light. She could barely see him, yet she felt every breath, every shift in his posture. In the hush of the storm, words seemed unnecessary. She closed the distance between them. He didn't protest this time. Their lips met in a rush of pent-up longing, the thunder outside echoing the fury of their passion. She tasted the rain on his skin, felt the heat of his body pressed against hers in the claustrophobic corridor. Cliffhanger, unbeknownst to them, a small security camera in the corner blinked, recording the entire moment. Fate had just taken an irreversible turn. When the lights returned, dawn was already streaking the sky. Lola woke in her bedroom, mind buzzing with guilt and a lingering warmth from the night before. She sat up, hugging her knees. She replayed the forbidden kiss, heart pounding all over again. Descending the grand staircase for breakfast, she sensed the staff's hushed whispers. Some gave her curious glances, others barely met her eyes. She thought she might be imagining it, until she found Mimi in the living room, holding a delicate pearl earring in her hand. "Sis, is this yours?" Mimi asked, voice edged with suspicion. Lola froze. It was the earring she'd worn during the night. The one she'd lost in the corridor while hurrying back to her room after the power returned. "Where did you find that?" Lola asked, voice faltering. "By the guardroom," Mimi replied with forced innocence. "Strange place to lose an earring, don't you think?" Lola attempted a casual shrug. "It must have fallen off while I was checking on the staff." Mimi's gaze lingered, unconvinced. "Be careful, cousin. People are watching." Cliffhanger, Lola's heart sank. She realized that her every move was under surveillance, by staff, by her cousin, perhaps by cameras. And Chief Adielu was still out there, with no sign of returning. Tension thickened in the mansion. Lola avoided Sun Kanmi's gaze to quell the rumors, but the longing in her chest refused to fade. Each stolen glance, each passing moment alone, made her heart leap, and made her paranoid about being caught. Unbeknownst to her, Chief Adielu had received Mimi's vague warnings. He decided to set a trap. Pretending to leave for another political engagement, he secretly returned the next day and instructed the house staff to install hidden cameras around the mansion, particularly near the gatehouse and inside the corridors. Night fell. Lola, thinking Chief was still away, couldn't resist seeking out Sun Kanmi for just a moment of solace. She slipped on a simple shawl, tiptoed past the staff quarters, and walked toward the guard post. Every step felt weighty with danger. Sun Kanmi was there, leaning against the wall, eyes closed. His face lit up when he saw her, then clouded with concern. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "I couldn't sleep," Lola admitted. "Chief is gone. I just needed..." Their conversation was cut short by a faint beep from an unnoticed camera's indicator light hidden behind a potted plant. It recorded their hushed words, capturing every stolen glance. Cliffhanger, in a secret room, Chief Adielu watched live footage on his laptop, jaw clenched. Lola was about to learn there was a high price for her indiscretion. The next morning, Lola was in the library reading a fashion magazine when the heavy double doors slammed open. Chief Adielu stood there, flanked by 2 armed bodyguards. Lola's heart lurched. She hadn't expected him home for another week. Without preamble, he tossed a set of photographs onto the mahogany table. They depicted Lola and Sun Kanmi in compromising moments, huddled together, hands touching, even the fateful kiss. "You dare betray me?" Chief's voice bellowed through the room. Lola recoiled, scrambling to gather the photos. "Adielu, I can explain." He slapped her hard across the face. The sound echoed in the silent library. His bodyguards lipped away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Chief pointed a trembling finger at her. "You are my wife. My property. And you let a common guard sully my name?" He spun to the guards. "Bring that man in." Within seconds, Sun Kanmi was dragged inside, arms pinned behind him. He was bruised, but his spirit remained defiant. Chief sneered at him. "I gave you a job, and this is your gratitude? Touching my wife?" Sun Kami's voice shook with rage. "She is not your property. She's a human being." Chief lunged, striking him across the face. "You'll regret ever touching what's mine," he hissed. Cliffhanger, Chief stormed out, ordering the bodyguards to lock Sun Kami in a storeroom. Lola stood there, horrified, tears streaming. She wondered if this was how her life would end, under the crushing thumb of a merciless husband. The mansion's atmosphere became oppressive. Lola was confined to her bedroom, guards posted at every door. She was denied visitors, though Mimi still roamed freely. Late that night, Baba Kazim, the night security guard who'd served in the household for decades, slipped a note under Lola's door. She opened it with trembling hands. "Madam, if you want to leave, I can help. But be warned, Chief's wrath is beyond measure." Her pulse raced. She had never seriously considered running away. Where would she go? With no real friends beyond her gilded cage, and her family dependent on Chief's money, she felt trapped. Yet, the thought of staying under his control, especially after his violent outburst, was suffocating. In the servants' quarters, Sun Kami was bound and guarded, but Baba Kazim managed to speak with him briefly. Later, under cover of night, the old guard relayed Sun Kami's words to Lola, "Tell her to stay. He'll destroy her if she tries to run." Conflicted, Lola paced her room. If she left, she'd lose everything. But if she stayed, her life would be a living hell. Then, she recalled the love in Sun Kami's eyes, and the absolute fear in them that morning. Could she really abandon him? Just before dawn, she scribbled a note back to Baba Kazim. "I can't stay here anymore. Help me." Cliffhanger, as she slipped the note under the door, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read simply, "Chief has done worse. Much worse. Beware." That afternoon, Baba Kazim lured Mimi away with a request for help. Meanwhile, Lola crept down to Chief's private study. She rummaged through file cabinets, seeking anything that might help her understand how to protect herself from his power. Behind a row of thick binders, she found a hidden file containing details about shell companies registered in Lola's name. She skimmed the documents, shock flooding her veins. They referenced large sums of money moving in and out, tied to suspicious deals. Sun Kami's voice echoed in her mind, "He'll destroy you." A sudden realization struck her. Chief wasn't just crooked in politics, he was laundering money using Lola as the unsuspecting face of his transactions. And if he was ever exposed, she'd be the one left holding the legal blame. She stuffed the documents into her purse, heart pounding. As she turned to leave, Baba Kazim appeared in the doorway, face grim. "Madam, that's not all," he murmured, handing her another envelope. Inside were pictures of young women on boats, tears in their eyes, bound and gagged. The corners of the photos were stamped with Chief's campaign logo. Lola's stomach churned. "Human trafficking," Baba Kazim whispered, voice shaking. "He's deeply involved. That's why your name is on those shell companies, to protect himself." Cliffhanger, Lola felt sick. If Chief could do this, what else was he capable of? She knew now there was no question, she and Sun Kami had to escape, and soon. Late that night, Baba Kazim tapped on Lola's window. She let him in, noticing how the old guard's hands trembled with urgency. He held out a small USB flash drive. "Your late maid, Aisha, left this with me before her mysterious death," he said solemnly. "She begged me to give it to you if you ever discovered Chief's true nature." Lola took the USB with shaking fingers. "What's on it?" "Evidence. Videos, documents, phone calls, enough to send Chief to prison for life. Aisha risked everything to gather this. Chief suspected something, which is why he couldn't finish the sentence." Lola stared at the drive, tears pricking her eyes. She recalled how Aisha had once warned her to be cautious around her husband, but she never understood the depth of the warning. Now, it all made horrifying sense. Baba Kazim cleared his throat. If this goes public, he's finished. But you must be careful. He'll do anything to keep these secrets hidden. Cliffhanger. Lola clutched the USB to her chest, a new wave of determination surging through her. She had real power for the first time in her life. Yet, the mere possession of this evidence put her in immediate, mortal danger. Chief Adilu had become increasingly paranoid, sensing Lola's defiance. He stationed guards outside her room at all times. She was rarely left alone. But she devised a plan with Baba Kazim and son Kanmi, who managed to get free of his bindings after bribing a guard. One stormy evening, Lola entered Chief's lavish bedroom, wearing a striking red gown. Candlelight flickered across the satin sheets. She forced herself to appear sultry and repentant. Chief eyed her suspiciously from the velvet armchair. "Why the sudden change of heart?" he asked, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey. Lola stepped closer, letting her hand glide over his shoulder. "Because I realize my place is by your side," she purred, feigning submission. Inside, her stomach churned at the thought of touching him, but she steadied herself for the greater goal. Meanwhile, hidden in the corridor, son Kanmi slipped into Chief's study with the USB in hand. He quickly navigated the desktop computer, uploading incriminating files to a secure online folder. The plan was risky. If caught, he'd be dead on the spot. Back in the bedroom, Lola kept Chief's attention with whispers of apology, stroking his ego with flattery. He was beginning to soften when he noticed a small green light blinking on his tablet, a remote notification from his system that data was being transferred. He shoved Lola aside and grabbed his tablet. Realizing files were being uploaded, he roared in fury. "No!" Cliffhanger. Lola's eyes widened as Chief tore out of the bedroom, gun in hand, leaving her behind. She sprinted after him, terrified that son Kanmi's life hung by a thread. A chaotic chase ensued. Son Kanmi fled the study, dodging Chief's gunshots that ricocheted off the marble walls. Lola ran to intercept, nearly colliding with a terrified housemaid. Baba Kazim signaled from the side exit, shouting, "This way." They managed to slip out through the kitchen door, racing under the cover of darkness toward a waiting car parked just outside the mansion's walls. Baba Kazim had arranged the vehicle. Rain hammered down, blurring visibility. Lola jumped into the front seat. Son Kanmi slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and floored the accelerator. Headlights carved a path through the storm as they sped onto the main highway, hearts pounding like war drums. But Chief's men were in pursuit. Black SUVs with tinted windows appeared in the rearview mirror, engines roaring. Son Kanmi weaved desperately between traffic, while Lola clutched the seat, praying. A bullet shattered the rear windshield. She screamed, ducking as glass sprayed everywhere. Just as they reached an exit sign pointing to Abadan, a sharp pop sounded. Their front tire was hit. The car careened wildly before son Kanmi wrestled it to a stop on the shoulder. Chief's men converged, armed and ready. "Stay down," son Kanmi ordered Lola. He sprang from the driver's seat, fists clenched, adrenaline coursing. In a flurry of motion, he incapacitated two men with powerful blows, but a third raised a gun, finger on the trigger. A deafening gunshot rang out. Son Kanmi staggered. Lola gasped, stumbling out of the car in horror. Cliffhanger. Son Kanmi collapsed onto the wet asphalt, rain mixing with what looked like blood. Lola screamed into the storm, sure she was watching him die. Days later, news spread that son Kanmi, the bodyguard turned fugitive, had been shot and killed during a high-speed chase. Chief Adilu publicly declared Lola mentally unstable and had her admitted to a private clinic, according to local gossip. However, the truth was far more complicated. Baba Kazim had managed to help Lola slip away in the chaos. She vanished from the city, going underground. The heartbreak of believing son Kanmi was gone forever weighed on her like a crushing boulder. She found refuge in a tiny town near the border, living off a small stash of money Baba Kazim had secretly provided. A quiet funeral was supposedly held for son Kanmi, though no body was shown. Rumors swirled, but no official investigation was launched. Chief Adilu used his political clout to bury the story and maintain his pristine public image. 2 long, agonizing years crawled by. During that time, Lola reinvented herself under a different name, volunteering at local shelters for battered women. She felt an ache for justice, haunted by the knowledge of Chief's crimes, and by the memory of son Kanmi's last stand. Cliffhanger, on a dusty afternoon, in a rural courthouse far from the city's bustle, a tall figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat and tinted glasses walked inside. Though disguised, there was something familiar about the way he moved. Lola, now a volunteer with a local women's rights NGO, finally found the courage to submit the USB files to the authorities. A public outcry ensued, culminating in Chief Adilu's dramatic arrest, captured live on national television. Footage of him being led away in handcuffs went viral. The trial attracted massive media attention. With the evidence she possessed, Lola stepped forward as a key witness. She took the stand, voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with every word. She recounted the years of manipulation, the laundering, the trafficking. The entire courtroom was stunned. Across the aisle, Chief sat fuming, flanked by lawyers. His once confident grin had vanished. When it was time for final submissions, the prosecution announced a surprise witness. The courtroom doors opened. Lola's heart nearly stopped. It was son Kanmi. Very much alive, though sporting a scar across his collarbone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chief stared in disbelief, color draining from his face. Son Kanmi took the stand, detailing how Baba Kazim had whisked him away after the shooting, paying off a local doctor to perform emergency surgery in secrecy. He'd spent months recovering, training himself in law and self-defense, determined to see Chief brought to justice. His testimony was the nail in Chief Adilu's coffin. Cliffhanger, cameras flashed as the judge pounded the gavel, ordering a further inquiry into Chief's associates. Lola stared at son Kanmi in shock, tears streaming. Their story wasn't over after all. In the weeks following the trial, Chief Adilu was denied bail. More victims came forward to testify against him. Public opinion turned fiercely against the once revered politician. Lola and son Kanmi, finally free from the shadows, found themselves drawn to each other again, this time without secrets, without shame. They decided to marry quietly, away from paparazzi and prying eyes. On a crisp morning, in a small chapel surrounded by lush greenery, Lola wore a simple white gown, no diamonds or extravagant jewelry. Only a handful of people attended, including Baba Kazim, who gave Lola away with tears in his eyes. Son Kanmi stood at the altar, heart pounding, eyes brimming with emotion as he watched Lola walk toward him. They exchanged vows, promising to protect one another, to cherish love that had grown from impossible beginnings. As they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the small audience erupted in gentle applause. Mimi was notably absent. She had distanced herself after Chief's trial, claiming innocence in the entire ordeal. That evening, Lola and son Kanmi settled into a tiny rented apartment, far from the opulent mansion that once caged her. They laughed over a simple meal, cherishing the ordinariness of it all. Cliffhanger, an unknown caller interrupted their bliss, leaving a chilling message. You think it's over? You have no idea what's coming next. Lola's heart hammered as she listened to the voicemail. The voice was disguised, but the threat was clear. She glanced at son Kanmi, who was already dialing back the number, only to find it disconnected. Days later, the truth emerged in the form of leaked emails. Mimi, Lola's own cousin, had been in league with a rival political faction all along. She had facilitated the infiltration of Chief Adilu's household to gather damning information for her own gain. But she also harbored deep resentment toward Lola, rooted in old family disputes over inheritance and favoritism. The final, startling twist: the mansion wasn't just a home. It was a front for the illegal operations Mimi and her handlers had planned to seize once they toppled Chief Adielu. By exposing him, Lola had unknowingly derailed Mimi's grand scheme. Now, Mimi sought vengeance. But this time, Lola and Sun Kanmi refused to be victims. With the help of the NGO and Baba Kazim, they pulled evidence against Mimi's shadowy network. Law enforcement launched an investigation that rattled the political underworld. In a quiet raid one chilly morning, Mimi and her accomplices were apprehended. At last, Lola exhaled. The conspiracy that had entrapped her in that mansion was finally dismantled. Final shot, weeks later, Lola and Sun Kanmi moved into a modest bungalow on the outskirts of the city. No more towering walls, no more guards. Standing in the backyard, Lola looked up at the open sky and whispered, "No more cages." Sun Kanmi joined her, lacing his fingers with hers. Their story, once riddled with betrayal, danger, and forbidden passion, had blossomed into a testament of resilience and hope. They walked inside, shutting the door on the past and embracing the promise of a peaceful future. End.